Welcome to Everyone Loves Guitar, where we get to sit down and talk with interesting professional guitar players and related music industry experts. If you love playing guitar, stick around. You're in the right place. Hey, this is Craig Garber. You know me as host of the Everyone Loves Guitar podcast, but when I'm not interviewing world-class guitar players, I'm busy helping clients with their marketing. In fact, since March of 2000, I've helped over 300 clients in 108 different industries all over the world sell everything from $20 books to $5,000 seminar seats and everything in between. I even authored a book about my experience called How to Make Maximum Money with Minimum Customers. Now, if you own or operate a business, ask yourself the following marketing-related questions and be honest with your answers. Are you generating fresh new qualified leads on a daily basis? Is your website generating enough sales? And if not, do you know why? Is your advertising effective? Is it predictably and reliably making you several multiples of what you're spending on it? And lastly, are you consistently communicating with your email list? Or do you have an email list of prospects and customers, but you have no idea what to say to them, how often to say it, or how to make money with this list? If you need solutions for these marketing problems, then you need to book a one-on-one marketing strategy session with me. After this strategy session, you'll know how to speak to and make money with your email list, how to use your website to attract customers and clients who are ready to buy from you now, and how to sell your goods and services for top dollar and at much higher profit margins than your competition. Listen, stop hoping things will get better on their own. Hope is not a very good business strategy. Instead, book a marketing strategy session with me by going to everyonelovesguitar.com/marketing and find out if your business meets the 5 criteria you need to qualify for this service. Again, that's everyonelovesguitar.com/marketing. Thanks for listening. Now let's get on with the show. Hey everybody, this is Craig Garber from Everyone Loves Guitar. And before I forget, go over to everyonelovesguitar.com and sign up to get some advance notice of upcoming podcasts. And we're getting ready to roll out some cool programs as well. Anyway, today I'm actually with one of my favorite guitar players, which is a really cool thing to do. He's someone I have a lot of respect for because of his work ethic and his tremendous level of talent. We have the one and only JD Simo with us today. And if you haven't heard about JD, you should, and you should crawl out from whatever rock you're under and check him out. I'll tell you a little bit about him. He's 32. Oh, he's 30. Sorry about that. He grew up in Chicago, began playing guitar at age 5. By age 15, he'd already formed a band and released a live EP recorded in Phoenix, Arizona, which sold 5,000 copies. He quickly earned a strong local following in the Phoenix area, and he spent most of his teenage years touring either in his own solo endeavors or in various other bands. In winter 2006, he moved to Nashville, where he established himself as the lead guitarist in the Don Kelly Band, and we'll talk about this. This led to Simo's employment as an in-demand session musician, and JD ultimately played on nearly 500 albums. Remember, he's only 30, and he hasn't even been doing session work in like 6 years, so that number is just massive. He continued to play in this capacity in 2011. In the beginning of 2010, he joined bassist Frank Swart and drummer Adam Abershoff to form the rock band Simo, and that's S-I-M-O. They spent much of 2011 on tour and released their debut album that November. They recently released their 3rd CD, which is called Rise and Shine. It's a tremendous, tremendous record, and we're going to talk about it today, and they released that in May of 2017. Hey, man, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Oh, man, I appreciate you having me. Thanks a lot, man.
You're welcome. JD is, like, how many days a year do you tour? Like 300?
Well, last year we were, 2016, we were gone 300 days. But this year we took the first, 4 months of the year off, which was great, to make Rise and Shine. And, so this year we were out like 130 or 40, which was really nice. But yeah, we did 300 last year. Yeah.
That's actually phenomenal. I mean, that's like, you couldn't imagine what that's. It's like being pregnant. You can't imagine what being pregnant is like unless you're pregnant. And I don't think you could imagine what being on the road 300 days is like. That's just a massive amount of work.
It's too much. It's too much. I mean, I'm glad. I think we all are really grateful to have had the opportunity to do it, and it had a lot of benefits, but it's too much. It's because it is at a certain point you can't kind of function normal in any sense, and it's just, it was. I'm glad we made it through it, because some bands don't, you know. But like I said, this year has been a lot more comfortable and a nice balance.
Great. I'm really happy for you, man. Hey, so before we get started, just curious, what's the last piece of music you listened to before we get on the call?
Oh, I was listening to there's a band from Memphis called the Bo Keys that I love a lot. That there's this gentleman down there named Scott Bomar who actually I don't know. I should know because we have a lot of mutual friends. But he's a producer, engineer, and he's a bass player, and he has kind of compiled this super group of a lot of older, very legendary, like Memphis side guys, if you will, and kind of put it together in a package called the Bo Keys, and they've made, I don't know, 3 or 4 records, I guess now. But I was listening to their last record, Got to Get Back, and it's really great, you know. But it's kind of an easy sell for me because several of the guys on it are like heroes of mine, you know. So it's a current band, but not like current, you know. It's older cats.
Yeah. It's amazing, you know. There's just so much music out there. I feel like when I was younger, I had a handle on a lot more than I do. It's no way I could keep up with everything now.
It's difficult. But I mean, that's one of the benefits of traveling is because you have just an enormous amount of time to read or listen to music, you know. And so if you like both those things, which I'm an avid reader and I'm a compulsive listener, it's great, you know, because I just, you know, because I spend hours and hours every day combing through Spotify most of the time. I'm kind of a Spotify junkie. So yeah,
that's what it is. It's probably time. My time is a lot. I don't have.
It takes a lot of time. It takes time.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about your latest album, Rise and Shine. It came out in September, right? Or it says May, but did it come out in September?
September. Yeah, no. It was that press release was probably issued in May or something. It came out in September.
Yeah, that's what I thought. How long did that take you to record?
Well, it took about a month to record, but the whole process took about 4 months because we spent like a whole month doing pre-production every day, and then we spent a month recording actually, and then we spent 2 months mixing. So it was a long process. It was 4 solid months of work, you know, with just handfuls of days off.
Did you do the mixing?
I didn't personally mix it, no, but I was there for all of it.
Right.
I'm myself and Alad, who's the bass player in the group, are kind of we know enough about engineering to get ourselves in trouble, but I wouldn't necessarily call either of us engineers. And we have a young friend of ours, Don Bates, who's a brilliant young mixer, engineer, producer here that we've forged a really good relationship with, and he's absolutely marvelous, and he's the one who actually who did it, and then he just had to put up with me breathing down the neck.
Well, it's funny that you say that because my next question was going to be: do you find that in the as part of the creative process, it's easier to play than to mix, like the editing? And this is where I'm coming from with this question. I write ad copy and I write long form sales letters. Writing is never hard. Editing is a fucking bitch. And is it the same thing? You know, laying down the tracks, you've done it, but now you got to clean it up. Is that tiring?
Well, when you're doing everything, it is there's a lot of fatigue involved. If you're just doing one, if you're just playing, or if you're just producing, it's a lot easier. But when you're doing both, it's difficult. And it really is where it really you really have to learn how to kind of power through and have the stamina to keep your head in the game. But I wouldn't necessarily say it's difficult. It could be for some. I just really enjoy the recording process, and I enjoy. All of us in the band have different strengths, and actually, when it comes to editing, that's actually one of my strong suits. So I wouldn't necessarily look at it as a handicap for me personally, but I think it's just different for every person.
Sure.
I actually I enjoy the editing process. I enjoy cleaning something up, but for the most part, when it comes to recording music, I like to make most of my decisions before we even go for a take, which means that inevitably you have a lot less to deal with on the other side of it once you get the take that you're looking for, that you're happy with. Not everybody works that way, but me personally, I'll sonically and arrangement wise in the song, obviously, and how the certain sounds of all the instruments are working with one another, all that kind of stuff. Like I prefer to kind of deal with everything on the front end, so that once you get a performance, then you can kind of embellish on it then, because all of the hard work is kind of already done. But that's not necessarily the way that a lot of people work these days. Once upon a time, you had to work that way because that was just how you worked, because of the limitations of the equipment that was used. But anyway, yeah, it's a long-winded answer, but
no, it's fun. So you'd rather spend your time sharpening your knife, so to speak, before you actually make the cut, so that when you come in there, you're so prepared that all these issues you kind of like preempt anything.
Well, yeah, I think that, you have to leave enough room for things to happen, but you do kind of have to have a plan, and you have to at least have a preconceived kind of vision in your head of how you want it to go, and then inevitably it's going to go the way it's going to go.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, but at least you have some sense of guidance, because otherwise you're just going to, otherwise you just waste time. Otherwise you inevitably burn, valuable hours of when everybody's in a good mood and ready to work.
Sure.
Because, you have to get your work done,
Oh, hell yeah. I've never asked a question about an album cover, but your album cover is actually cute. And I was curious, is like with the three little kids, is that somehow like superimposed pictures of the three of you?
No. What happened was we had a photo shoot booked for an album cover or for just press photos. We just had a photo shoot booked. And so we were in this one particular area, right where we made the record, right across from the studio. And we were walking around. We took photos in a whole bunch of different places, and there's a little playground there that the back cover is the three of us. We just ended up screwing around on the playground, and we got this one photo that we all ended up really liking. And we were thinking about using that for the cover, and then the idea came up of, well, what if we took some young children and posed them kind of the same as in this photo that just happened to happen. And so we put it together, and we borrowed some friends' children and dressed them up somewhat like the three of us, and took the photo.
That was really cool.
In the same place.
Very cool.
Like a week later. Mm-hmm.
Was that in Nashville?
Yeah.
Very cool. I really enjoyed your record, but it's right up my alley, the kind of style I usually listen to in my rotation.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. So first, I just want to thank you for creating it, because the songs are very thick, they're textured, and you got a lot going on out throughout the entire album.
Thank you.
And you're welcome. And I wanted to talk about a few of the songs specifically. Light the Candle. So that's like a 7.5 minute, basically a blowout blues rock anthem or jam. And it's like, that's the kind of stuff I could listen to that all day, literally. And, my notes here, props to your drummer on that one. He was like, beat the shit out of the drum kit. I mean, he just sounded great. The guitar sounded amazing. And I was curious what guitar you were playing on there. Was that a Strat or?
No, I used my, pretty much all of the record is my old 335 that I play all the time. I have an old 62 335 that I play most of the time. And, it's that guitar and, I was just playing through I have a couple of old super reverbs and that I use most of the time and live nowadays, and it was just one of those. And I'm sitting in my basement, which is now just in the last week or so since I got home from tour, like we're actually turning it into a real studio finally, because it's kind of been I don't know. I've had like apprehension about actually like really having a studio.
Why?
And I find why?
Yeah.
Because I don't know. Because I'm weird and I don't really. There's a part of me that doesn't want to live in the factory.
Yeah.
I don't really necessarily enjoy it, but I'm embracing it finally because we actually have a really good space that I just have spent no time making great. And so I'm finally, like, we did a bunch of stuff yesterday, and it's because we have everything we need. That's the funny thing. It's like there shouldn't be any aversion because I have everything that is necessary for us to do what we do. But anyway, the reason I say that is because Light the Candle is the only song on the record that wasn't cut at the studio. We cut everything else. It was cut in my basement. And we weren't, it was just pre-production thing. I mean, it was tracked, it was multi-tracked and everything, but there was no separation between anything, and it was a pretty ragged recording. But once we got into the recording studio, once we'd moved all our stuff in, we did multiple, like on several different days, did takes of Light the Candle, and we just weren't really pleased with any of them. And so in the end, we decided to use that performance and embrace, the raggedness of it, and kind of exploit that somewhat because we really all liked that particular performance.
Oh, that's great.
So thank you. So yeah, so that's pre making my Studio Pro by many means.
Well, I can understand you having an aversion to that because there is always a danger of, like completely like never leaving the house some days, and I totally get that, man. And it's not like you're not, when you're out of the house, you're working on all the, you're working a lot. So I totally get that, man. Mm-hmm. In putting that song out there, both in terms of the message and in terms of, and in making this such a long song, what were you thinking about? I mean, was it planned like that to be such a long jam, or?
No, not really. I mean, it's one of the, there's certain songs in our repertoire that kind of lend themselves to improvisation more than others. But in our group, pretty much any song in our repertoire can and does end up turning into something along those lines on any given night. It just depends. Like, it's part of kind of the center of what our group is. I don't know. It's definitely how we formed, and it's, in assessing what we're good at, it's definitely one of the things that we're really good at. Like, that's one of our good strengths. So with that particular song, I mean, no, it wasn't necessarily planned, but that's just the way it's turned out. And, it's different every time. That's the thing. It's never the same.
Sure.
You know.
Another song over 7 minutes, "Be With You." It's a seriously deep blues, and I loved every second of it. You got like loads of swirling psychedelic riffs, and I was curious, was that multi-tracks on the guitar? Because it just seems like you got a lot going on there, especially in the beginning.
Yeah, there is. There's a few. Let me see here. "Be With You" there's the main tracked guitar that, like that, when the three of us cut it, that I played live. And then I think I just went back and I overdubbed slide, which, if I'm not mistaken, I think I ran direct. Because I was really having fun distorting the console. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that I ran direct for that one. So there's a slide, like all of the slide stuff was overdubbed. But the rest is just the track guitar that I'm just throughout the song, I'm manipulating my volume controls on my 335 to get more gain, less gain, that kind of thing.
Sure. It's a great song. Another beautiful song is "The Light." I was curious if there's anything other than your voice and an acoustic in there.
No, that's it. It was that was the last thing that was recorded, and we had spent, like I said, like nearly 2 months mixing the record, which was a long, very, very hard process. And on the last night when we finished mixing, and I typically, like, I live like Elvis hours. Like I get up in the afternoon, and I like to be up till 5, 6, 7 in the morning. Like that's when I function.
Right.
And so it can be rough on some of the people that work with me, because not everybody's kind of used to that kind of schedule. And so Don, who the engineer I mentioned, he was gracious enough to, for 4 months of his life, live on vampire hours. And so we had finished the last day of mixing, and it was 5 or 6 in the morning, and I had written The Light, and we had demoed it in like a full band fashion, and we just had never gotten around to cutting it. And I really wanted to include it. And so I asked him, once he finished mixing the last song, which I think was "Be With You." I could be wrong though. And I said, "Could you just throw a mic up, because I want to do something really simple." And he had we were at his studio and in North Nashville, and he had a little arch top guitar laying there, and I just tuned it way down. And I hadn't worked on the song in that fashion, but I just thought I don't know, it's just it occurred to me, and I just said, let's do it, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And so I did it a couple of times, and then there's that one performance I really liked, and so I ended up using it.
That's
because I wanted to, but I really wanted something mellow. It wasn't necessarily that particular song, but like I felt like after having gone through the mixing process, I wanted something gentle in between "Be With You" and "I Pray." I wanted something, and I didn't know quite what, and throughout the mixing process, I was like, I'll figure out what to put there. I'll figure something out, and so that ended up occurring to me, and I liked it, and so we ended up using it.
That's really cool, man.
Thank you.
Talk about "I Pray" now. Again, 13 plus minutes, man. Hats off to you. That's not easy to do that. You got kind of like Mike Bloomfield on that one. You reminded me of something off Super Sessions. It just sounded great. You had like a lot of blues and almost some sort of like Eastern raga stuff at times. And I was curious if was most of that off the cuff or was any of that worked out ahead of time?
Oh, none of it. Yeah, none of it was worked out. It's all.
Oh, wow.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, that's something that the three of us do really naturally every time we're together. So, you know, that's just one performance of it, you know. Because that's the same thing. It's never the same. It's different every night. You know, there's no cues or anything. It just seems to always kind of work out. You know, some are better than others. That's the nature of improvisation, though, that you sacrifice consistency, if you will, for, you know, the moments when it really is, when musicians are really communicating well together. You know, that I don't think that there's any other way that can really happen unless you know, because anytime that there's a constriction, it seems to kind of kill the ability for that to happen. So, you know, it makes it so, you know, in one way it's great because every night's different, but, you know, not all nights are fantastic, you know.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Sure.
Yeah.
So you're saying that, like, because it's unpredictable, and because, you know, we're all imperfect, you know, human beings. You know, some nights will be good, some nights will be great, and some nights will be average, and some nights will be not that good. But you prefer that. You've made a conscious decision. You want that off the cuff creative improv as opposed to having laid down a quote solo that was sort of worked out or ahead of time and restricting.
Well, for us, the decision is more because we're better that way. We're not as good. We're not as good when we kind of have things too planned out. It's not as good. It's good, but it's not as good.
Right. Right.
We you know, that's the benefit of being together for a decent amount of time and playing as many shows and stuff as we have, is we've been able to experiment and try and obviously refine and get better and better at what we do. But through that, you know, there's a lot of experimenting and, you know, time and time again, it's just, it doesn't, we don't seem to be able to do that as well. We're better when things are left somewhat open-ended.
Yeah. Well, it sounds, whatever you're doing, the formula's working because the album was great. I mean, honestly, and I'm not saying that because you're here in front of me. I read something, and I don't know if it's true or not, so if you can clarify. I read on Wikipedia, it said JD claimed much of the lyrical content was autobiographical, and it was hard for him to listen to at times because of its revealing nature. And I was curious if that's true. What about the lyrics were tough for you? And
oh, well, yeah, no, that is true. That's interesting. That's up there.
I know, it's like, you know, where the hell did these things come from? You know, who puts these things? Who's up at 5 in the morning
but
putting on?
Yeah, that's no, that is true. Actually, no, it's just well, we had to do a like 6 months ago or whenever it was, we had to do like a group listen to the album with people from our management and a handful of other people. And I, you know, under normal circumstances, I was looking forward to it because I was, you know, really proud of the record as the other two are. And it was like, oh man, you know, check it out. But it was really difficult for me to listen to it with other people around because, you know, most of a good portion of what each of the songs are about are really personal to me for the first time. And like, I realize that now that like other people around me, they don't necessarily know what I'm talking about, but it made me extremely uncomfortable at that time. Like that, I was like, I don't want to do this again. I don't want to listen with other people because it's just really uncomfortable for me. So that's, I think, what that's referring to. So
what did you feel you made yourself more vulnerable expressively on this record than some of your other records?
Oh yeah, no, as a writer, I've definitely, like, I don't know. I mean, I think that, I think it's probably just like anything. I mean, the longer you do something, hopefully the better you get at it. And as a writer, I feel like a lot of the things that I've written in the past was, I don't know, maybe somewhat paint by numbers writing, I guess would be a way I would call it, where it's like my intentions were good, but it wasn't because I was needing to kind of get something out of my system. Whereas this time it was much more natural, where, the things when I would write something, it was because I needed to kind of, get something out of my system, which was a new thing for me, Do
you think that's a function of a combination between you're getting better at your craft and just as a person getting older, you're getting better at communicating?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure, I'm sure it's all of it. I think that, I don't know, I think that at least in my case, I'm finally, starting to have a certain amount of inner peace about who and what I am, and I think that it's easier for me to not feel weird about sharing any of that. And also, from my perspective, I don't really, I think that, what I'm more driven to want to be better at is to be a better writer, to be a better singer, to be a better producer, all those types of things, because those are the things that I gravitate towards. Those are the things that I look up to others in. It's not to devalue my ability to play and be a musician, but it's just I don't know. For me, that I'm much more kind of I'm much more inspired by people who are good writers and people who are good producers, good singers, because I think it's harder to do those things. In general, I think that there are more great musicians in the world than there are those other things, if that makes sense. Yeah, it
totally makes sense. And also, you're already, I mean, if you spent the next 5 years woodshedding, because of where you're at performance-wise, you may only get ahead 2% higher than where you're at now.
Sure.
So, but if you spent the next 5 years focusing on that, because you're not as high up the curve in that, you'll make great strides in there, So that makes tons of sense. There's benefits to liking yourself that you don't know about until you actually like yourself. Isn't that funny?
Yeah, very much.
If you're comfortable with it, and if you're not, it's totally cool. Can we talk about some of the spots in the record where you felt that you did make yourself vulnerable? And if you're not, it's totally cool.
I mean, I'd rather, I'll talk about it in a broad sense, but I don't really, I think it's meaning that, the songs that are like the first song, Return, the second song, Meditation, Shine, the third track, I Want Love. Those tracks in particular, they're introspective. They're about self-examination, and they're, each of them are about very specific elements in my kind of psychological growth of me coming to terms with certain things, and so, and I feel, each of those tracks in particular, like they represent, they're all kind of saying the same thing. They're just saying them in a different way.
Sure.
And it's me wanting to not spend any more time in my life kind of marred by junk from my past. I'd rather deal with it in a positive manner so that maybe I can come out the other end of it and have, a more enjoyable, rest of my life, however long that is. Hopefully that's a while, but, no one knows. And so I think that, those tracks in particular, they kind of, they all speak of that, and that's me, that's as personal as I get. And I think that, the other tracks are about different things. There's still a bit of that introspection in most of the rest of the tracks, but those ones in particular are pretty, like if you read the lyrics, I think you could figure it out.
Thanks, man. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. I had a buddy, a really close friend of mine, about, 3 or 4 years ago. I was going through some shit, and he said, Craig, do not look at the past. He said, there's nothing for you. There's nothing there for you at all. And I said, man, you're right. I mean, he was 100. That's it. There's just nothing there. And as much as it, and it was when I understood that from a logical standpoint, like, yeah, you're right. Like, why would I need to move, it's no upside for me hanging out there. None. And when I finally understood that from a logical standpoint, I was able to let shit go a lot easier. So for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, no.
I assume most of your time now, or getting ready to be spent touring to support and market Rise and Shine? Yeah. You're originally from Chicago?
Yeah.
Cool. What was your childhood like growing up there?
It was great. I mean, it was a great place to grow up. I talk quite often about how fortunate I was to grow up near an incredible public library, because my fascination with lots of things, but with show business and music, started really young. And my kind of obsession with research, if you will, I've always had, even when I was very, very young. And so the resource material from the Lincoln Park Public Library was incredibly helpful to me, because their record collection, there was nothing that I couldn't find there. And and video material, like whether it be Elvis movies or the old Ed Sullivan shows, or I'm trying to think, like, music documentaries. In particular, there was a UPN miniseries called The History of Rock and Roll that was extremely influential to me, that came out in the early 90s when I was very young. Had I grown up in Birmingham, Alabama, I don't think I would have had access to all of that. So it was great, you know. But as far as, you know, what my childhood was like, you know, I started playing guitar when I was 5. And I come from a family of mostly athletes. And I was an only child. I have a bunch of older step siblings, but I was raised basically as an only child. And you know, I showed an interest in music, and my parents, you know, got me a guitar when I was 5, and I was just obsessed with it. I was and still am to a certain extent a loner, and you know, just would go and get resource material either from the local record store or from the public library, and I would just obsess over it. And, you know, my childhood was mostly spent, you know, doing that.
Woodshedding, basically.
Yeah.
And learning.
Absolutely.
What kind of work did your parents do?
My mother was a stay-at-home mother, and my father was an ad man, like Mad Men.
That's very cool. I mentioned to you earlier, I really admire and respect your work ethic, and I was curious if that came from any aspect, you know, that was that instilled in you, or is there something? I mean, it's in hearing you talk about it, it sounds like this is just who you are. Like, you know, you spent hours doing research as a kid, and and is there any accountability for that? Like, why did that come? I'm always curious to find out stuff like that. If so.
I think, well, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is just who and what I've always been. But I do, you know, my family, you know, I think a lot of it is, you know, I'm sure is influence from my family, because both my father, you know, my father is what I would call, you know, a classic example of what used to be looked at as the middle class in this country. You know, we weren't rich, but we weren't poor. My father did grow up poor. You know, he grew up, he was 50 when I was born. He had already raised an entire family in the 1960s. And so my father grew up in the 30s and 40s in Chicago, and he grew up poor. You know, my grandfather worked at the stockyards in Chicago and slaughtered hogs his whole life.
Wow.
My mother's side of the family, my grandfather on her side was an auto mechanic his whole life. And so on both sides, it's a very blue-collar, very Midwest type of scenario. That was very much the environment that I grew up in. You know, I grew up in, you know, you work hard and you're rewarded for your hard work. And, you know, the kind of, I guess in a certain way, you know, like my father, you know, the thing that was always odd to me when I was a child was, you know, like I said, my father was 50 years old when I was born, and he had already raised 4 kids in the 1960s. So, you know, I was raised very much like a child would have been in the 50s or 60s. It was a very, very different type of mentality than all the kids that I grew up in, you know, because when it came to discipline and it came to, you know, I don't know, like even like just cultural things, like, you know, my father, you know, like I carried a hanky in my pocket, because that's what a man carries, you know, like that was because I was taught that, you know,
sure.
Which was very different than the children that I was raised with, you know,
right.
Who were being reared by baby boomers.
Yeah, they were playing video games after school.
Yeah, no, and that was not a part of that was not a part of my life. Yeah.
Very interesting. Wow. Really interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
What prompted you to move to Nashville?
It was simply that I needed to move somewhere that was going to advance my opportunities. And because I'd been playing my whole life and playing professionally my whole life for the most part, I started playing in bars and stuff like that when I was 9, 10 years old. And when I wasn't even in high school. I was in 7th and 8th grade, and I was already gigging on the weekends.
Wow. So that's a major dichotomy. On the one hand, you got to carry a hanky. And on the other hand, you're 9 years old, hustling gigs in bars. Holy shit.
Well, I know, but it's not. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but my parents were with me, and there was no. I wasn't acting like in anything but an ultra professional manner, and it was all about just because that's what I wanted to do, and I'm lucky, because my parents were very supportive, and went and because I wouldn't have been able to do it without them.
Sure.
And that's the only way you can do it is to get out and do it. So yeah, I mean, but what it meant is that, by the time I got in high school, I mean, I had very low tolerance for the whole kind of figuring out what it is you want to do with your life thing, because I was already doing it. And so consequently, I didn't last long, because I was already gigging and making money.
Right.
So, it meant that like many before me, I dropped out, in sophomore year to go play music.
And just let me clarify what I was saying before was, I think that because I didn't want to come off like I was trying to stir up any controversy, I was just saying those are two big, those are two wide, different ends of the spectrum. And I think, and I think that probably made you super independent because you had to, figure your own line out. Because clearly, for whatever reason, your brain was advanced processing all this stuff. I
mean, yes and no. I mean, there's it. I look back at it, and I mean, I'm able to. There's a lot of arrogance that goes with youth, and I wouldn't necessarily say that I was arrogant to a huge degree, but I definitely wasn't lacking any confidence in doing what it was that I wanted to do. And I learned a lot of lessons as a result of that, because you can't be a kid and understand what can and will happen to you out in the world. And so, but it's all part of the journey, and it's all part of growing up.
Yeah, 100%. For whatever it's worth, I actually told somebody, you've been like the absolute nicest guy to deal with in like our limited dealings. You've been so like incredibly nice and professional. So
thank you.
You got the arrogance thing worked out, whatever way you did it. By far, that would have been the last word I would have thought about.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah, man.
I think you just live long enough that you get it out of your system.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Well, you got it out. Trust me.
Well, thank you.
When you first moved to Nashville, what did you do to hustle up gigs, or did you come over there with a gig?
I didn't have a gig. I had money saved, thankfully, and it was. I mean, it was. It was impossible, man. I mean, it was. I didn't fare well.
How old were you when you moved over here?
I was just turning 21, and I knew I needed to move somewhere that was going to help me advance, and I was either going to move. I knew I didn't want to move to Los Angeles. I knew I didn't want to move to New York. So I figured, well, I'll move to either Austin, Texas, or Nashville, because I'd traveled all over the country. So I'd been everywhere multiple times by this point, and
through music, through gigging.
Yeah, through gigging, because that's all I did for all of my teenage years was travel the country and play. And so I'd been everywhere, and I'd experienced every place multiple times. And I really liked Austin, Texas a lot, and still do. But I had and still have a very dear friend here in Nashville, who was actually the best man at my wedding, who, we just had a long conversation one night, and he was like, I really think that you should move to Nashville because I think that you'll find what you're looking for here more than in Austin. I think you as he put it to me, he was like, I think that you'd have a better time in Austin, but you won't, but there isn't the opportunities in Austin that there are in Nashville. And that made sense to me because to a certain extent that is true. Now, 10, 11 years since then, I think that that's true. And so, I just did it, and I got here, and the town has changed quite a bit since I moved here. It's out so much bigger than it was. When I got here, it was still very small, and still, it took no time at all to kind of figure out the different cliques, as it were, and where they hung out, musicians meaning. And if you were going to kind of ingratiate yourself into the town, it wasn't very hard because there was, half a dozen or so places that if you just frequented them and opened your mouth, you would at least meet some of these people, and then it kind of takes care of itself from there. And that has kind of changed a lot in the last 10 years as our town has grown. It's not like that anymore, which is a shame. And but nonetheless, it's I was 9-10 months in, and I was broke, and I was to basically kind of destitute because I didn't know what I was going to do, and there was nothing happening for me. and so there's this story I tell, which is true, which I ended up going down to busk on the street corner downtown on Broadway, and as luck would have it, a gentleman that I knew already, Dave Rowe, who's a notable session bass player here in town, walked by, and I knew Dave, and Dave was like, "What are you doing?" And I told him the truth, and I just said, I'm trying to make some money because I'm broke and I don't know what to do, and he took pity on me because he was walking to his gig. At the time, he was playing with the Don Kelly Band at night. He would do his sessions during the day, and then he would play in the club at night at Roberts. And so I knew of the Don Kelly Band because that was like the hot picker band in town. And, and so I gladly followed him into Roberts, and he introduced me to Don. And then a short while after that, Don gave me a chance to audition, basically to sit in on a slow night, and then I started working with Don as a sub first, and then eventually he gave me the gig full time, I guess about 6 months later, and that and then everything really changed, really quickly.
Who was playing guitar before that?
Guthrie Trapp, who is an amazing guitarist, and played with Jerry Douglas, and played with Patty Loveless, and a whole host of others, and is a great session guitarist now in his own right. And Guthrie was basically kind of he'd been in the band, I guess, about 5 years at that point, or something to that extent, and was kind of in the beginning of his transition out. So the timing just worked out really well,
Talk about the people who don't know the backstory to Don Kelly, and that he gets the hot the it guitarist, not to like brag about yourself, but that is what that's what he's noted for.
He's got an incredible track listing. Don is from Texas. He is a Texan in every way, shape, and form. Very intimidating kind of guy, and he's just a real legendary band leader, if you will, in a very old school way. He moved to Nashville in the late '70s he was originally a bass player. Still is a really great bass player, but he there was an old club in Nashville called the Stagecoach Lounge, which is kind of old school Nashville. And that house band at the Stagecoach Lounge was always a really happening house band. I'm talking back in the '70s, if you will. And so Don ended up taking over that band as the band leader. And his first band that he put together at the Stagecoach had a 20 or 21-year-old Brent Mason, who obviously is one of the world's most legendary session guitarists. And the rest of the band was incredible too. But ever since then, that was the first band that Don put together. And then since then, after Brent, he's had multiple. Troy Lancaster, I think, followed him, and then Red Volkart,
yeah,
who went on to play with Merle Haggard, and Kenny Vaughan, who plays with Marty Stewart now, and Johnny Hyland, and Guthrie Trapp, of course, and
Daniel.
Daniel Donato followed me.
Let me tell you something. While you mentioned, before I forget, I interviewed Daniel Donato a while back.
Oh, really?
I told him I was interviewing you, and he says, "Please make sure you tell JD that if it wasn't for him, I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing." He said you influenced him, and you inspired him more than any other player, and he looked up to you all the time. So
wow.
I wanted to pass that along from him because I figured that'll make you feel good.
Oh, man, it does, because I've known Daniel since he was probably 12 or 13 years old.
Yeah.
Because he used to come to the club with his father every week.
Yeah, he told me this story. Yeah, it was really cool.
He was there every week, and it used to make me self-conscious because he would bring a tape recorder, and it's needless to say, like that gig, the Don Kelly gig, is a long gig. It's 4 hours, and so in a given night you're going to play 50, 60 songs, okay, and not everything you play is going to be great,
Sure.
And I was like, man, you got to turn that thing off. You've got all the songs that this band plays, like. If I was having a particularly off night or something, it was like, come on, man, turn the tape recorder off. But yeah, so that's kind of, I think everyone I just mentioned were like the full-time guys. But then when it comes to like who subbed in the band too, I mean, you're talking about every great session guitar player in Nashville has played in Don's band at one point in time. But as far as like the guys who actually had the gig full time, I've probably missed a couple, but that's the majority of them, in succession from Brent, who was the first. So,
yeah, it's an legendary kind of oddity in music in general to have something like that. I think to be a part of that,
it is. Yeah.
Okay, so basically and I always like to look at this because I find it so fascinating. I mean, the guy's name who the bass player who saw you busking.
Oh, Dave Rowe.
Dave Rowe. If Dave Rowe, hadn't walked by there, if he walked by there 10 minutes earlier, I mean, your whole destiny. I mean, isn't that I always find that shit so amazing, like how stuff goes down. It's like just so cool. Okay, so then you're playing in Don's band, and then how did you get to start doing sessions?
It was kind of incestuous in that it happened just a natural evolution where, at least when I was in that band, because the weird thing is I know that everything's continuing to change here. And at least when I was in Don's band, it was basically like right before the tourists really took control of downtown Nashville entirely. Okay. So it was still easy to park. It was still touristy, but like people like producers, people from record companies, people from publishing companies and stuff like that, like music business people frequented Roberts for entertainment, but also to kind of scope out what was going on. Yeah. And that had been that way going back to, I'm saying, like the Stagecoach Lounge days with Don Kill. Now I think that's pretty much over with, because downtown has changed so much, and it probably, by the time I was leaving, that shift had already kind of tipped over, if you will. But in the beginning, you know, at least for the first few years that I was with Don, every night there'd be somebody important in the audience, whether it was a producer, an artist, a music industry person, heroes of mine. James Burton, would be in the back having a hamburger. I mean, it was, T-Bone Burnett used to come in all the time, the famous producer. I mean, it was every night there was somebody important in there. And so it was really easy to network, and then people naturally start to call you to do stuff. And so it started off small. It started off with, people having me come to their home studios and stuff like that, which is good because then you get used to the recording process in kind of a low pressure scenario where there isn't a lot at stake. And eventually, started getting called to plan demos and stuff like that. And then eventually started getting to, a couple of big producers started using me on masters and stuff. And there was a lot of stuff that I did for like Universal Music and Warner Chappell Publishing, because it's changed now. But like when I was doing all of this, it was still kind of when songwriters for these publishing companies would do X number of demos for the songs they turned in every month, so I did a ton of those. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of those. And it just kind of one thing led to another,
Just from the visibility of being in that band. Yeah, that's awesome. Can you share, if you're comfortable, some of the masters you worked on, or some of the artists?
Well, the first big artist, like country artist that like I played on stuff that was on the radio was for a guy named Rodney Atkins, because his producer Ted Hewitt was like the first guy that actually like called me to like play on a master. So that was like the first time I heard myself on the radio. But it's funny though, because like the stuff that some of the cooler stuff that I've actually gotten to do, I've done since. Like, because I don't really play on records anymore because I'm gone, and it's not really something I do. But every once in a while, I'll get a call to do something, and it just works out. And like, I actually, Jack White's people called me to play, to do a session like a year and a half ago at Jack's house.
That's cool.
And it turned out that we were working on stuff for the Beyonce record Lemonade. So like, that was one of the cooler things I've ever done, but it's like years past when I was, an actual session player,
That's called a residual benefit.
Well, yeah, I guess, but it's just kind of funny how that works out,
So the first time you're getting these calls, though, man, like 6 months earlier, you're like, shit, I can't even pay my rent. And so it must have been like, it's surreal to some extent for you.
Well, it is. Yes and no, because you just kind of, you're in the motion of it, and you're just trying to, kind of keep your head above water, like the whole time. And, the first time somebody calls you, you really want to do a good job, so they call you back, so you don't really have a lot of time to kind of be assessing things, because you have to like,
so things happened that quick where you were just like, it snowballed almost immediately.
Yeah, I mean,
That's great.
within a couple of months. But like I said, it happened gradually. Like, it started with going to people's houses and like playing on some demos for $50, and then it was a gradual thing where it wasn't like, I was thrown into a master scale, session before I was ready for it.
Sure.
Like it by the time I got into a huge studio with 18 guys, I was conditioned for it and really nervous, but I was ready to do well or not do well, put it that way.
Sure. Do you still speak to Dave, or do you ever still see him? Do you bounce into him, run into him occasionally? Dave Rowe.
Oh, yeah, no. Dave and I are still really good friends. He is experiencing a great period in his career, because he has a great relationship with Dan Auerbach from the Black Keys, and he played on Dan's new solo record, and now they're getting ready to do some touring for that. And through his relationship with Dan, he also worked on the last Ray LaMontagne record and Lana Del Rey, and so Dave's doing fantastic.
Good. That's awesome. What were some of the bigger surprises about playing professionally down in Nashville, about the business end of being a professional? Not necessarily bad things or ugly things, but just in general, some of the things you're like, and like you had to kind of learn the ropes, things you weren't expecting.
That's a good question. Well, I would say that the hardest thing was realizing how competitive it is, and how really you have guys who are trying to break in, you have guys who are established, and then you have like legends, basically all kind of fighting for the same pool of work. And there's a certain romanticism that is put upon like being the professional musician. And in all reality, man, I mean, it's a job, and you got to hustle, and you have to be on your stuff, and everybody's competing for the same kind of pool of work. And that's a weird, like, when you realize that you're like essentially kind of competing with heroes of yours for work, it's a strange thing to kind of wrap your head around. And everybody deals with it differently. Everybody, some people are really good kind of politickers, and some people are really good at kind of selling themselves and being salesmen. And some people take the adverse, some people just kind of put their head down and do the best they can and just let it all kind of happen as it's going to. And that was something that was really interesting to observe as a guy in his early 20s.
Which road did you see yourself going down? Like, were you more of the politicker, the salesperson, or just the put your head down and take things as it comes?
Well, for the most part, I just put my head down and did the best I could. To say that there isn't an element of me that is able to politic would be a lie. I mean, I understood really quickly the importance of being able to, make yourself visible and to be a good hang and to get along with people and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I'm not really that social of a person. So like I naturally had, I think, a decent balance because like I was always really good at, hanging in the group, as it were, but I was not ever one for kind of extracurricular activities.
Sure.
I was not going to go like schmooze, as it were, after hours. That never was me. So that's just not my personality. So I had a decent balance, with that.
Yeah, and that being said, I think that's a lot of decisions you got to make when you're in your early 20s too, to be hit with all that shit.
I mean, not every decision I made was great. I mean, that's you live and learn.
Yeah, right.
You live and learn, and but that being said, I was very conscientious. I assessed the situations I was in, and I was fortunate that I kind of always had allies around me to kind of help me wade through the water, and I let them. Which that's another mistake that people that are young make. You really, you have to let people help you. And you have to have a certain amount of humility to allow that to happen.
Are you good about that now, letting people help you?
I am, yeah. And I was then, too. I mean, like, I never, it's a fine line between being confident and being able to kind of exude what it is that you need to exude. And like I said earlier, like being arrogant or, whatever, it's a fine line, and you have to walk that line.
Sure. Yeah, I think asking for help, I know in my own life, that's probably one of the things I wish I did much earlier. I had a hard time asking for help. It's a tough thing for certain people. I normally do not ask this question to people that are your age, man, but I have to ask this to you because you're not like a normal 30-year-old in this sense. You've been playing more of your life than you haven't been at this point, much more of your life. But my question is, we all pay some kind of tuition in our careers, and I was wondering if you'd be kind enough to maybe share one or two mistakes that you made along the journey and what the lessons that you learned from those mistakes.
That's a good question. I would say that, luckily nothing too glaring pops out of my memory, which is a good sign.
Yeah, very good sign.
But I think that I wish that I'd have moved to a place like Nashville sooner. I think that I procrastinated that move at least by a couple or a few years because I was afraid. But looking back, there's no reason why I couldn't have done it when I was 18. Certainly. So I think that, if you're going to do something like that, you should just do it. You shouldn't let fear keep you from doing that, because all that's doing is keeping you from starting the journey. And the longer you wait, the longer you're going to have to wait. Right. So I think that I would have, that I think is a mistake, that I kind of stunted my growth by a few years, because I didn't really, I think, by the time I was 18, I'd already, even by that point, I'd already toured all over the country and played 4 or 5 sets a night in bars for years. And all the things that kind of I learned really quickly once I moved to Nashville, I could have easily started that process a few years earlier. Like I didn't, there's nothing that happened between the time I was 18 and right before I turned 21 that I essentially was just repeating steps, if that makes sense. And other than that, I think that the desire, it's the other was kind of, it would kind of be along the same lines, that I wish that I'd started concentrating on writing earlier, so that maybe I'd be farther along. Because I was so caught up in lots of other things, I wish that I'd started really applying myself a little sooner than I did. I
appreciate you sharing that. And if you might find this interesting, that is one of the most common answers I get to that question is, I wish I came to Nashville sooner.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, very common. Let's look at the flip side of that question. Is there one or two particular things you did that at the time might have been out of your comfort zone, but turned out to be, wow, really, really good things that you did them?
Oh, man. Well, all the above. Whether it's when I eventually, a few weeks after Dave introduced me to him, when I finally auditioned for Don Kelly, I'd never played that type of music, and I certainly I didn't have the ability, that I would gain, of course, but I I was scared to death, but I just did it, it was, to say that it was out of my comfort zone is putting it lightly.
I was actually wondering that when you told, I was thinking that, God, you didn't play country in Chicago. I was curious about that. How did you even, the fact that you got that gig is pretty amazing. How did you finesse through those things, not being a country player?
Well, I immersed myself in it, and I worked really hard. It was an all-day obsessive, playing, as some people talk about, practicing 5 or 6 hours a day and then going to the club and playing all night. It was hard work.
Right.
It was hard work. I put the work in. How I got it, I have no idea. I was just doing the best that I could do at that particular moment. And I think that from Don's perspective, I think in the very beginning, my abilities absolutely weren't where they needed to be. But I was always a decent performer. And in the end, the Don Kelly Band is there to make money. Okay. So I think that more than carried my ability in the very beginning, because at least I was entertaining to the audience while I became good enough, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense, because yes, that makes a ton of sense. And I think, I think calling a spade like that is I like that, man, because it's, I hear a lot of times from players, and they'll say, I really wasn't, one of the things they learn is, I really wasn't as good a performer. I was a good player, but I wasn't as good a performer. And you were both, but not familiar with country. But the performance side, that's a big thing there. They wanted to make money, and this guy knew how to perform on stage, and so and you already had clearly a talent base, so it wasn't a stretch. It was just you had to do reps to get to that point where you can get that kind of music down.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it one fed the other, but it definitely So
very cool, man. Let's talk about gear for a few minutes. You said your go-to guitar is pretty much a 62 335.
Yeah, that's I mean, I'm blessed. I have a lot of really nice instruments to pick from, and but that, that's really the only guitar that I ever really reached for.
When did you get that?
I've had it, I guess I've had it probably 5 or 6 years now.
Was there a cool story behind how you got it, or interesting story?
Somewhat. I mean, I hadn't really had the opportunity to play many vintage instruments up to this point. And I became friends with this gentleman who lives here and works at Carter Vintage now. His name's Gary Bohannon, and he had this particular instrument for a long period of time because he dealt in vintage instruments and had bought and sold hundreds and hundreds of old guitars. And he pulled it out one time. We were hanging out, and he pulled it out, and it just really felt natural to me. And I didn't really I wasn't necessarily looking for a 335, or even really been that attracted to one necessarily. But it just felt really comfortable to me, and I was kind of drawn to it. And so he was gracious enough to let me borrow it a bunch. And then finally it was like, dude, I really would like to work out something with this. And so he gave me his conditions. He wanted me to find a specific old guitar that he'd always wanted. And if I found it and bought it, he would trade me for it, that kind of thing, which luckily it all worked out. And I found one relatively quickly, which is a whole nother long story. And I've had, we swapped, and I've had it ever since. And then as a result of me having that, I became friends with all these vintage people that are kind of scattered throughout the world. And I mean, I've had ridiculous access. I've played stuff I never thought I would ever have at the chance. It's just insane. I mean, I've had, the opportunity to play 100 and I don't even know how many now, real bursts. And I had a real burst in my possession for a couple of years that I toured with. And I mean, just you name it. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And
talking about a 59 burst?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How do you know, speaking of bursts, how do you know Greg Martin?
Greg and I met for the first time when I first moved to Nashville, because there was a gentleman who was going to manage me when I just moved here, who was friends with Richard Young.
Yeah, the rhythm guitar player.
For the rhythm guitar player. And so Greg and I met through him when I hadn't even, I probably hadn't been in Nashville 3 months. And then Greg's brother, who is unfortunately has passed away now, he used to come with his wife to Roberts all the time when I was playing with Don Kelly. He used to come and hang all the time because he loved the band. And so Greg and I just became friends over time. I mean, we've known each other for 10 years now.
One of the nicest human beings I've ever in my life had occasion to meet. I mean, after I interviewed him, we spent like two or 3 hours together, and I wanted to hug the guy. I mean, he's just so pure of everything, man. And he's just so, he's just a very unique human being, He is. Yeah. Absolutely. In every way, man. He's a good man. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, really good guy. He's a good role model, that's for sure. He's coming down here, I think in about 3 weeks they're playing a gig, so I'm looking forward to getting to meet him in person.
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
Yeah, very cool.
You'll have a blast, man. It's fun.
I'm really looking forward to it. Okay, so you got your 62, 335. What other, let's say, 2 guitars would round out your top 3?
Well, there's a 55 Telecaster that I really love, that I play from time to time. And then there's a slew of other ones. There's a 59 Stratocaster that I play from time to time. There's a 59 345 that I play from time to time. There's a bunch of new instruments that kind of get rotated around. There's a a year and a half ago now, the Gibson Custom Shop did a copy of my 62, and so I've got a couple of prototypes of that are great. And
is that a thin? Is that a thin neck?
It's not big, but I wouldn't necessarily call it skinny. It's just right.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've got a whole bunch of stuff, but I mean, that's kind of the main ones that I go to. But I only ever reach for my old, it's really the only guitar for me,
Funny, you went from never having played a vintage to only playing vintage
for the most part.
Yeah,
it's interesting, crazy, and it just happened. It just happened. It wasn't necessarily it just happened.
I think anybody that's under the influence of Greg Martin goes that way. It's a vintage guitar, Marshall Plexi, cable, boom, done.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah.
That's what all the guys I've met through him. Everybody's the same, and they all like, well, I used to play this, but once I got around Greg, I really learned the value of a vintage instrument. So, like, do you know the guys I'm sure from Otis?
Oh yeah.
So Boone and Steve, I think Boone plays like a 335 or he's got a burst, I think, and cable Marshall Plexi, boom, and same thing with Steve. It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Are any guitar players that influenced you that people would be surprised to hear?
Well, to be honest with you, people might be surprised. I don't know, but both Brittany Howard and Heath Fogg, the two guitarists in the Alabama Shakes,
interesting,
are very influential to me, because I just think that, to me, they, as guitarists, I mean, obviously Brittany is like a genius, because she, as a writer, as a vocalist, as a performer, she's pretty unparalleled. But if we're just talking strictly as a musician, as a guitarist, her and Heath both, I don't think there's a better kind of guitar team, out there in music at the moment, because they I mean, it helps because their songs are so damn good. But the parts that they play with one another are integral to the songs. They're very well thought out. They both of them know tone really well. They both, Brittany, I know in particular, is kind of an audiophile and is a studio rat, and she understands. She's a geek, and so and it's not surprising, because there's really great sounds on both of the Alabama Shakes records. But they're really influential to me, especially, I mean, obviously in a contemporary sense, but just in a general sense, I think that they're perfect.
Very cool. How about this duo, Ronnie and Keith?
Oh, well, obviously.
I know you're talking about modern guys. I get you.
Yeah. Well, no. I mean, it's just that, like, to me, I mean, there's nothing I can say that hasn't already been said about, Ronnie and Keith, or Keith and Mick Taylor, or Keith and Brian Jones. I mean, or for that matter, John Lennon and George Harrison, or Tom Petty and Mike Campbell, or any other great ensemble playing. Sure. But just as far as something that maybe someone, especially a guitar person or a guitar geek or something, would be surprised at, I think it would be that. I think that, if there's a guitar geek out there that hasn't really taken the time to kind of really delve into the Alabama Shakes, they ought to, because I think you'll be really pleasantly surprised with the parts, the sounds, and the interplay, because it's pretty brilliant, I think.
JD, if I asked you to pick your 3 favorite albums in no particular order, understanding that this could change today, tomorrow, the next day, what would you pick right now?
Well, I would certainly pick Isaac Hayes' Hot Buttered Soul.
Good record, man.
Because that is like, I mean,
it's Hot Buttered Soul, man.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny. I'm wearing my Hot Buttered Soul.
There you go.
But the reason why I say that easily is because, you know, everybody goes through different seasons of their life, and I think that the obsession that now has kind of carried me through the making of Rise and Shine, and now kind of into the space that I'm in, Hot Buttered Soul kind of started that seed, not only for me but also for my bandmates, because what that record kind of encapsulates is it's psychedelic music, but it was psychedelic music interpreted through black culture, through R&B, and it's a very different funnel than, like, the, not to be racist about it, but than the white interpretation of kind of psychedelic music. And that influence of that album, and Michael Tolles in particular, who played guitar on that record, has just kind of reshaped how I think about how I want to play and the kind of sounds that I want to hear and just all that. So that one's really easy. Top three, though, I would probably put Pet Sounds in there,
Beach
because
Boys.
I think that because that album still, to me, I mean, obviously it's kind of become a Portlandia joke now, but but you know, that album really does, I think, kind of encapsulate just how great a record can be in every sense. I don't think it's ever been done better. You know, I think that it's funny, you know, Brian Wilson, he beat the Beatles to it, you know, like there wouldn't be a Sgt. Pepper if it wasn't for Pet Sounds. And I love Sgt. Pepper, but Pet Sounds, I don't know, I just have a greater love for that album as a piece. And then, you know, I'll go ahead and I'll say Sound and Color, the last Alabama Shakes record. Because I don't think that there's been a better album made in the last 20 years. The songs, the production, the performances, it's just a perfect album. So
I'm embarrassed to tell you I'm having a brain fart here. Who and I just can't think of his name, and I listen to him all the time, is another black artist, guitar player that interpreted psychedelic music tremendously. Shaft, who played the soundtrack for Shaft.
Oh, well,
Curtis Mayfield is the guy I'm thinking of.
Oh, you're thinking of the Superfly soundtrack.
Yeah, right. Curtis Mayfield. I have like all his records. He's another guy who did a tremendous, same era of time.
No, it's that whole vein of production and just approach is something that I'm really kind of knee deep in at the moment. And I think part of it is because it's just naturally stuff that I really like, but also I think that it's that approach is something that I'm not tired of hearing.
Your record is reflective of that. I mean, you can you can tell there's a lot of that influence in Rise and Shine.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, man.
That means a lot.
Yeah. Well, you ever listen to Eddie Hazel from
Funkadelic.
Why am I having such a he does Maggot Brain, that song?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I saw the Government Mule, I think it was I've seen them 4 or 5 times, but I saw them in 11 at the Beacon Theater, and they opened up with that song, and it was like, wow, that's how the show opened up, and it was like that for 3 hours, man. It was just freaking phenomenal. Yeah.
No, the Eddie. I mean, George Clinton in particular, but the 4 Funkadelic albums. The first album, that's just called Funkadelic is probably my favorite, and then Free Your Mind and Your Ass Will Follow is the second one, and then Maggot Brain is the third one, and I forget what the fourth one is, but those ones in particular are huge for us as well.
No.
And like I said, the first album, which is just called Funkadelic, or some people refer to it as Mommy, What's a Funkadelic, is really big with us, and Eddie Hazel's playing in particular is a big influence.
Yeah,
but it's funny because Michael Toles, he really is like my favorite, because he was in a lot of ways not influenced by, because when I listen to Eddie Hazel, I can tell that he loved Jimi Hendrix. I can tell
absolutely. Yeah.
I can tell that he loved stuff of that era. Part of the reason why I think I became so knocked out by Michael Toles' playing was because it sounded different. It sounded like a guy who was an old school R&B player who just happened to get a fuzz tone and a wah-wah pedal. And like he was playing the same way, but just had these more modern sounds, And I'm fortunate because now, Michael and I have actually become really good friends, and we actually, I guess it was probably a month or two ago, probably 2 months now. There's a real famous recording studio in Memphis, Tennessee called Royal Studios, which is they just celebrated their 60th year, and they had a whole year's worth this year of big events to commemorate it, and they did a big gala concert at the Orpheum Theater in Memphis that they filmed for a television special for PBS, and we were lucky to be involved in it. And Michael was there as part of the house band with Steve Jordan playing drums and the rest of the living members of the high rhythm section that played on all the Al Green and Ann Peebles and Don Bryant and Ovie Wright and all the other acts that recorded at Royal. And so Michael is fortunately still around, and he and I have become good friends, and we spent a lot of time together that day.
That's awesome.
And, yeah, it was really cool.
Man, I'd love to get him on this show. You think he'd be open to that? Oh
yeah, no, absolutely. I'll pass it. I'll pass it on to him because
love to get him
he
on
is
here.
He barely has a cell phone.
Skype. We may have to bring in somebody from outside to hook up Skype.
Yeah, no, because he's a forgotten giant, and it was great to ask him all the questions I wanted to ask him, and sit with him, because he's the real thing.
That's cool, man. I've had the opportunity to talk to a few guys of that era, and I got to tell you, as soon as we get to the Skype conversation, the interview dies. I mean, they're all gung ho. I swear to God, they're all like, "Man, yeah, this sounds really cool. Let's do it." Especially if they've got like something to promote, and I'm like thrilled to have help them, and they're like, "Let me ask my wife." And then it usually like, "I'm sorry, I couldn't do," So, let's go under the hood now.
Sure.
Something or someone you miss from your childhood.
Oh man, I missed a lot. Or something I miss from my childhood.
Yeah, something you miss. Something you miss, not something you missed out on. Although you could talk about that too if you prefer.
Well, to be honest with you, I don't really miss a lot from my childhood, because the majority of my childhood was me focused on trying to get somewhere, trying to, I'm very kind of happy in my own skin at the moment, and so I don't really miss. I wouldn't say that I really miss anything from then. but having said that, I did miss out on a lot of normal childhood things because I was busy doing other stuff.
Yeah.
But, you know, if I had to trade one for the other, I would make the same decision again.
Sure. It's all part of the journey, too. You don't know. You make a left turn instead of a right turn your whole life. I mean, you could have been a computer scientist somewhere. You know, I mean, seriously, you just don't know how these things work.
Yeah.
Tell me something about yourself people would either be surprised to hear or would find a little odd.
Well, I don't drink alcohol and I don't do drugs. I'm as straight razor as they come. And that's pretty odd for most people. I don't really shout it from the hilltops or anything, but it's you know, it's odd for my line of work.
Yeah, a little bit.
But it's just not who I am. I'm just not. I don't necessarily have an aversion to it. I don't have a judgmental sense of it. It's not religious based or anything. It's just, you know, I've tried it and it just really doesn't.
Not your thing.
It's not my thing. Yeah. You know, I'm. It's funny though because there's guys in, like B.B. King was that way. Bobby Rush, who's an old legendary R&B guy, is that way. You know, so I'm certainly not the first one to ever be like that.
Totally not.
But it's fairly surprising for most.
Actually, in Nashville, there's more guys, unless they're full of shit, but there's more guys. There's either more guys lying about that or more guys that have that in common than I would have, as opposed to musicians as a whole. Then there's, do you know who Lance Lopez is?
Yeah, I know Lance. Yeah.
Okay, so I interviewed Lance, and Lance has just gotten sober in the last 3 years. He's done a great job, but he was on tour with some really old school guys from sort of like the Chitlin circuit, and that's where he got hooked on junk. He said because those guys were all drug addicts. Mm-hmm. So I mean, it's like wow. I mean, the disparity is very wide. You know,
it is. It is, and it's. I mean, you know, it's more a part of the music business than I wish it was, because you know, to me, there's nothing good that comes from it. It you know, I think it robs you of your ability to truly be able to enjoy the good parts, and it certainly clouds your ability to be able to work on the things that you need to work on, and you know, all the other things that anyone could ever say about it. But yeah, I mean, you know, everybody's path is different.
Sure. Most important person in your life?
Oh, my wife, definitely.
Man, and I just want to congratulate you that you've been together with her for so long, man. That's a really cool thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, very cool.
Thank you. She's my girl.
Good for you, man. That's awesome. Most important thing your dad taught you? Besides to carry a hanky at all times.
Yeah, just besides to carry a hanky. You know, not to lie. You know, that a man doesn't, you know, that quote unquote, a man only has his word, you know, and if your word isn't worth anything, then you're not a man. That kind of mentality.
Yeah, that's a pretty liberating lesson, though, to be honest with you. I mean, like, you know, I don't lie, but I never have to go to bed worrying about like what's.
Well, yeah, I mean that's the double-edged sword of not being truthful, is that, you know, if you always tell the truth, you never have to remember.
Yeah, I don't have the ability to the point where like I almost not envy, but like I've met guys that are just compulsive liars, and there's a sense of me like, shit, how do you? I can't keep the one life I have together straight. You know, I've met guys that like have multiple lives almost. I'm like, how the heck? I mean, that's a skill set involved. I can't even manage the keeping shit straight. And it's like, okay, you know, most important thing your mom taught you.
Oh my goodness. Oh shoot. Probably to not be judged. It's a lesson that I think I'm still trying to learn, but to not be judgmental, to kind of take people and things at face value. You know, kind of the innocent until proven guilty concept.
Sure. Do you have a non-musical superpower?
Oh God. Man, it sure would be cool to fly.
No, but do you have a superpower that you have, like is there some odd or weird skill set you're really good at? That's
I gotcha. I gotcha. I
like
gotcha.
you could smell, cheese in a warehouse. I don't know, some weird thing. I've heard a lot of cool.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily call it a superpower, but I have, or something that's positive or good. But I am not what I would call careless or reckless, but somehow I am the breaker of all things. Things, and it doesn't matter what it is. They can be electrical, they can be whatever. Like, if something at all is going to fail, it's going to fail on my watch. It can be a light bulb that's brand new that just decides to go out, or it can be something in a car or something gear related or anything. For some reason, chaos follows me.
That is interesting.
And people close to me call me the beta tester as a result of it. Because if something can last interaction with me, then you're pretty solid.
Well, I'm almost at the end of the interview, so I should be really, really grateful then. I've made it all the way through.
Yeah.
Best money you've ever spent?
Best money I've ever spent. Shit. Shoot, man. Well, I mean, I can answer that a whole bunch of different ways. I think that, a more philosophical answer would be like, the first album I ever bought.
Which was
Elvis Presley. It was Heartbreak Hotel, the album. But the adult me would say, because I'm a foodie, I love chefs and I love food, and my wife and I, the year before last, spent Christmas in New York, and we went to 11 Madison Park, which is a 3 Michelin star restaurant with Daniel Humm, who is a very now becoming a legendary chef in his own time, and it was absolutely the most incredible experience, worth every penny.
That's awesome, man. 11 Madison. What's your biggest business or personal win?
Oh gosh. Well, I think my biggest personal win is meeting my wife, by far.
How'd you guys meet?
We met at a mutual friend's house. I was hanging out not long before I went and played on the street corner, which got me into the Don Kelly band. I was hanging out at a friend of mine's house, and he knew my now wife Karen, and so she stopped by to hang out for a little bit, and we met, and from the minute we met, we became like kind of inseparable. We were kind of best friends first, and then became like an item like after a few months of hanging out every day.
That's really cool, man.
Yeah. So, that I think is, beyond the greatest win of my life.
That's nice, man. How about business? Biggest business win? I feel the same way about my wife, by the way. So I'm with you on that.
Awesome. Well, shoot, man, I don't know. Business win. I think just moving to Nashville, I guess. Because that made everything else possible. I think would be the easiest answer for that.
I know you're into reading and listening to music, and you're a foodie. Are there any other hobbies or interests outside of music you have?
Well, my wife and I are really, we're really into animals. We have 2 dogs and 2 cats.
Awesome.
And that occupies a big part of our life. So I would definitely put that in there because that's a big part of our life. That's really kind of it, because I think that when it comes to like watching movies and reading and stuff like that, it's all there's lots and lots of different things that I'm interested in. But I don't really, as far as hobbies are concerned, like I don't fish. I don't, that all, things that I would naturally kind of call normal hobbies. I'm very much kind of a loner homebody. When I'm not out on the road. So it's just kind of, reading and watching movies, taking care of the animals, cooking, listening to music. That's
quite a bit, actually.
That's me.
No, that's quite a bit. Toughest decision you ever had to make, or hardest thing you've ever had to do?
Well, I think the toughest thing I've ever had to do was moving to Nashville, because I was very much kind of secure living in Phoenix where I was living, and I certainly could have just kept doing what I was doing and made a living and been fine. And, choosing to leave that and try and make a life for myself in a highly competitive place, was terrifying, with good reason.
Sure, absolutely. It's interesting, though, that I just want to point out that the toughest thing you had to do led to your biggest breakthrough. And so,
well, that's how it works.
That's how it works. I know people don't realize that sometimes. They think, "Wow, this guy." Whether it's music or like I'm coming from the business world, or it's wow, overnight, man. Nothing's overnight, and you just don't see the years of and the apprehension and the fear of making those decisions and saying, "Fuck it, I'm going to do it anyway." Yeah.
No, everybody shares that, and that's the thing that's really universal.
Yeah.
For any line of work.
Yes.
Really.
100%, man. One last question, man, and you have truly been a real sweet guy, a real pleasure to talk with, and I appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate it. I've enjoyed it.
My question is, you're the kind of guy, you're always trying to grow and push, and I was curious, over the last 10 years, let's say, or 5 to 10 years even, how has your personality changed the most?
Oh, man. Well, I'm a lot calmer. I'm a lot more at peace. I'm calmer. I'm more at peace, and I think I spent the majority of my youth being so. And I'm still young, so I mean, I get the dichotomy of I get the ridiculousness of some of what I'm saying, but up to the point that I'm at now, I've spent a lot of time kind of focused on where I was wanting to get, which is good, but it robs you of some of the joy that happens along the way. And so part of where I'm at currently is enjoying much more so the moment that I'm in. And still being driven and aware of where I'd like to get, but allowing myself to enjoy the moment that I'm in a lot more, because I really didn't do that at all. And it's it's important to do that, especially because life is, I mean, I've been really blessed. I mean, I have a really great life, and somehow or another, everything's always worked out. Maybe not the way I wanted it to, but it somehow or another, everything's always worked out and continued to. And I think that it's important to truly, enjoy the joy of it, and I think that the older that I get, the more I see that a lot of us don't do that, and we're so focused on what it is that we're trying to accomplish or do. It's like, that's great, that's important, but the focus should be in the moment you're in. And I think that it's been helpful to me because as an improviser, like what I do every day with my guys out on the road and when we're on our own time too, I'm good at being in the moment in that case. And so it's been trying to kind of transpose how I feel when I'm playing music in that zen and have that kind of, how to have that feeling just in normal life, and the realization that they can happen,
Sure.
That it doesn't have to be in the middle of playing music. It can be in regular life too.
Man, I really respect that because you learned that at a young age. I didn't learn that till like 2 years ago. And you know what helped me learn that was, funny enough, I started playing guitar 2 years ago. Oh. And I was, you can't improvise and think about a meeting you had last week or, something you have going on tomorrow. You got to be right there. And I enjoyed that so much. And it was that which allowed me to then kind of like do what you said of still being future driven, but not to the exclusion of right now.
Right.
And it's been such a great gift.
It is a great gift,
man.
And, life's fun, man.
Yeah.
It's, there's, you take the good with the bad, and there's always going to be something that you need to deal with, or, there's always going to be some sense of struggle, but all in all, I mean, it's just that thing. I mean, it's never as bad as we think it is, or as good.
Or as good, right.
In the middle,
Hey, man, I want to thank you so much for your time and your generosity and for being like really candid and open. And I think by nature, you're probably more of a quiet guy. So I really, really thank you for
thank you.
Getting out of your comfort zone a little bit maybe and doing this.
It's all good. No, I really appreciate it, man. Thank you for having me. And I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
You're welcome. I want to tell everybody, if you don't know JD Simo, check out JD Simo and Simo, the band. I'm going to tell you where to get listen to his stuff. First of all, the new album is called Rise and Shine. It's a phenomenal record. If you're into 1970s blues, funk, soul, and just music that makes you feel really good, and a band that's fucking giving 110% on every single beat, I would encourage you to check it out. If you don't like that kind of stuff, it's not for you. You can find it on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, all the usual suspects, but go out and spend some money and support JD's music because he deserves it. You can find these guys on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, 2 different places, all 3 social media outlets. It's JD Simo Music, and that's JD as in JD, Juris Doctorate, Simo, S-I-M-O Music. Or Simo the Band, S-I-M-O the Band, all one word. Okay, so JD Simo Music and Simo the Band. Check out the new album, Rise and Shine. It's phenomenal. JD, any final words of wisdom, or where are you going to be next year? Can people find you on your website?
Oh yeah, no, we'll be out. I start a solo tour in 2 weeks. So for the whole month of January, I'm going out touring with Tommy Emmanuel.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah. And that's mostly on the West Coast. And then we have a Simo then I get done with that. And we have an East Coast tour in February with some Midwest shows as well. And then, We're going back to the West Coast in March and on into the sunset.
When are you coming down here?
I don't know. You know, Florida is you're in Tampa?
Yeah.
Florida is this weird. We did a festival in Tampa once, and then we did a festival in Miami, and that's all that we've done in Florida. So I don't know. I'm sure at some point we'll get down there in the coming year, because we play. I mean, my goodness. I mean, you know, we joke and say we've been everywhere 4 times now, but for some reason we don't get down that way as often as other places.
Yeah, it happens. A lot of people. It's kind of off the beaten track for some reason to come down here.
Yeah, I don't know, and I don't know why that is. You know, because we've had good times the couple of times we've played down in Florida.
Sure.
But,
well, if you're here, we'll definitely connect, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you again. Listen, everybody, check out JD Simo. Get the new album, Rise and Shine. It's awesome. I want to thank you all for listening very much. I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did. Thanks again, JD, for all your time and being so candid. I genuinely appreciate it. Go to everyonelovesguitar.com and sign up to get notified about future episodes, along with some cool stuff for guitar players. Now, be nice, go play your guitar, be in the present, and have fun. Till next time, peace and love, and I'm out. We hope you enjoyed this show. If you did, subscribe to the Everyone Loves Guitar podcast, and you can do this online at everyonelovesguitar.com or on iTunes. And if you like the show, please leave us a 5-star positive review. The more 5-star reviews we get, the higher our show ranks, and higher rankings mean we get to continue speaking with cool, interesting guests on our show. We'll see you on the next episode, and until then, keep playing your guitar and have fun making music.